Here is John Oliver solving the crisis in the Middle East.
Both sides are firing rockets, but one side has one of the most advanced militaries in the world. Both sides are suffering heartbreaking casualties, but one side is suffering them exponentially. And it's not like the US is operating from the moral high ground here. It's obviously no stranger to drone-striking weddings and saying, we were just trying to target enemy combatants. This country has blood on its hands too. And look, if you believe Israel's actions are warranted and proportionate this week, you're welcome to try and make that argument. But we have got to start having this conversation honestly, and falling back on convenient sanitized terms like real estate disputes and airstrikes on militants feels a little disingenuous when what you're describing is forcing people from the homes they've lived in for decades and killing civilians and children. And again, none of this frees Hamas from responsibility, but Hamas doesn't represent all Palestinians, just as what Israel is doing right now doesn't represent all Israelis or indeed Jewish people. Lots is complicated here, but some things are pretty simple. One side is suffering much more.
It was very hard for me to understand that, not just because it was incoherent, but also because of that funny accent. So helping me to decipher John Oliver's comments is Ian Haworth, who is the editor and an editor at Daily Wire, former big tech engineer, and a podcast host. Ian, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be wheeled out every time John Oliver says something stupid, which is more often than not. So.
It is. You're getting more airtime than anybody over here. I need you to interpret this for me, and then I need you to explain your countrymen.
Yeah, so I think first, John Oliver is simply not funny. He's supposed to be a comedian. And it's almost like the Big Bang Theory effect, where have you ever watched it without the laugh track?
It's devastating.
It's shockingly and devastatingly not funny.
Yeah.
And John Oliver, because of COVID, doesn't have an audience, and so you don't have the clapter that he's used to.
Yeah.
And so he likes to sit there and just use the fact that he's English, just really to skip over facts and logic, which is really at the center of this entire debate regarding Israel and the Palestinians. And he says we just need to be honest, but he is fundamentally dishonest through that entire segment and throughout most of his show.
So he's saying that Israel is in the wrong here because they're using greater force and they're capable of greater force than the Palestinian Arabs. Well, what's wrong with that argument?
I mean, firstly, we're making the argument that it has to be almost equal level of outcome for it to be fair. I mean, this is what the left argue anyway. It's almost like an equity of war. But if we look at, firstly, what the chronology of the actual conflict is, Hamas are raining rockets down on Jewish civilians completely randomly. They're just firing rockets into the air. I believe about 30% of them land in Gaza, so they're firing rockets at their own people too. Notice he didn't really seem that bothered. He almost looks at it like it's, just run-of-the-mill day, Jews being fired upon by rockets. They should almost accept that. It doesn't matter that Israel has more military might than the Palestinians. That's usually because they've spent money on defense systems like the Iron Dome, because they need defense systems like the Iron Dome. I think the way he looks at it as if it should be tit for tat, as if there were an equal number of dead Jews, then suddenly he would be okay with it. It's just absolutely absurd. The Israeli military is reacting to a constant threat, as they should, as any country on earth would. And I think it's just testament to the basic anti-Semitism at the root of all of this, that people see Jews defending themselves and think, they should really just let themselves be attacked a little bit more so it's fair.
Well, there's also, I think, this underlying premise that, sure, Hamas is firing these rockets at civilians, but look, they don't have really sophisticated rockets. And yeah, sure, some of the rockets are hitting their own people, but hey, look, who can blame them? This is the cri de coeur of an oppressed people against Israel, which is much better armed and much better funded and has the support of the United States, which is the global superpower. And so, look, if some rockets hit some civilians, and if the Palestinian authorities and Hamas, leading Palestine, they don't care about that, well, really, we can't blame them. And this gets to a point that Oliver makes. He says, Hamas, yeah, they're bad. Okay, fine, I grant Hamas is not great. But they don't represent the Palestinians. Your answer?
I mean, there's a reason why Abbas, who's been president for way beyond his term time, doesn't want to have another election. It's because Hamas would probably be voted into power. So the argument that they don't represent all Palestinians, that's probably true. I'm sure there's plenty of Palestinians who would rather just live in peace and not be involved in this at all. But let's not pretend that this isn't a position that is celebrated by many people who live there. You can only get away with this level of activity if you have the basic support of your citizenry too. And just the equivalence he puts between the Israeli military and Hamas. The Israeli military do more than any military on earth to try and avoid civilian casualties. They will warn people prior to striking a building where they know Hamas activity is going on. There's no other military in the world that would give terrorists warning so that as many civilians could get out as possible. But again, Oliver doesn't care about facts, and people just look at him, and because he's English, people just think he's smart and clever and accurate. I mean, that's my thing. It works for me, but certainly not for him.
It's also worth reminding people, Hamas did win an election.
Yeah.
They won an election in 2005. So just if you believe in self-government, they do represent the Palestinian people. Right? And they have the direct support of a lot of them, and they represent probably all of them. Okay, so John Oliver, I'm now convinced. You've persuaded me, Ian. He's not that funny, he's not that smart, and he's misinformed on this topic. Okay, fair enough. I need you to answer for another one of your countrymen, though. This would be the erstwhile member of your former ruling family, Prince Harry. Prince Harry has made a lot of unfortunate statements in recent weeks as his wife has led him around by various appendages. And Prince Harry just went on a show. You know, he's always begging for privacy, and he's always begging for privacy on television and on podcasts and all over the media. But he has now taken a direct shot at his adoptive country, the United States, because he said that the First Amendment is bonkers.
I mean, he also said that he didn't know much about it, but he thinks it's bonkers. I think there's the things that Harry doesn't know much about could fill a warehouse. I mean, he is not an intelligent guy. There are rumors that he cheated in high school and was helped to cheat, and he still failed his exams. If you're a member of the royal family, you go to a £30,000 a year in Eton, and you cheat and you still fail, you're not a smart guy. So I think we should just take that as a given that he doesn't really know what he's talking about. I think it's more just funny the way he is presented as this sort of pseudo-celebrity, pseudo-member of the royal family. He really, whatever hat he needs to wear at that moment is just accepted. So he wants his privacy. He's talking about how the First Amendment just should have its limits when it comes to freedom of the press. And it's amazing that freedom of the press is suddenly bad again now that Biden is in power. But then he's also this member of the royal family that has this strange authority on matters that I'm pretty sure Americans should not care about when it comes to members or former members of the British royal family. There was a rather small conflict a few years ago. At least that's what you've told me, that there was a little war over this. And I don't think I have to listen to really any member of the royal family, let alone a thoroughly unintelligent one like Prince Harry.
Well, you know, I keep trying to take as charitable view I can of Harry and the royal family, because I know there are many American conservatives who say basically, I don't care about what those guys have thought since 1776, but I actually like the tradition. I have great affection for the motherland. You know, even that nice German lady who sits on the throne now in England, I have great affection for her as a sort of standard bearer of tradition and the Anglo-American tradition. You know, that we get the Anglo-American tradition obviously from the Anglo-Saxons, and so I like that. However, actually, I'd like to even be more charitable to Harry. When he says in this specific case that he wants to be a little harsher on the press, I'd like to be a little harsher on the press too, frankly. I think the press gets away with a whole lot in this country and they don't face any consequences. However, it's disingenuous coming from this guy because he's always courting the press. He's always courting publicity. And to your point, this is such a good point. The guy just wants to have his cake and eat it too. And you actually saw this during the Mexit, during the escape of Harry and Meghan from the royal family. You saw stories about how Meghan loved the perks of being a royal, but she didn't like the duty. She loved wearing the tiara, but she didn't like having to serve. And it would seem to be the same thing for Harry as well. Are they in the royal family or are they not? Is you is or is you ain't my baby? It seems like they switch every day depending on what suits their tastes.
Well, I also think they're a perfect metaphor for our generation and younger generations now. The entitlement, the sense that you deserve some form of lifestyle without having to give back anything. I think Prince Harry is someone who is born into it, so I have some sympathy for the idea that maybe that's not the life you chose, but he could just go away. But he doesn't want that. He wants to link up with Meghan Markle, who just wants to use this as a step ladder to fame, because this is a fast track to being one of the most famous people in the world. But they don't want to give back. I think a lot of it is always about them. And I think that's something that the royal family at its core fundamentally isn't. I think that's why Queen Elizabeth is so popular, is because it's never been about her. You don't see her on TV sobbing about various traumas she's gone through. Everyone goes through trauma. Prince Harry is an incredibly wealthy person who has had the best of everything. I think people get a little bit upset when they're going through things in their life. No one cares. And Prince Harry goes on Oprah and, when he's allowed to speak by his wife, complains about the quality of his life.
Of course. It's, you know, his grandfather's body is barely cold, and he goes on the air and says that his father was a bad father to him and that his grandfather was a bad father to his father. And everyone has just done so wrong by poor little Harry. There's something so distasteful about it. And it's not just the family dynamic. I think it's not just gossip about this family or another. Patriotism is an extension of your love for your family. It's an extension of filial piety, right? If you don't care about your family, you're certainly not going to care about the families that are down the street or in some other state or something. And I do wonder if there's a connection here between the breakdown of the family, the breakdown of the most famous family in the world, and the breakdown of a love of country throughout the West and especially throughout the Anglosphere.
I think that's definitely true, but I think fundamentally it's just the selfishness of it. I think Prince Harry and Meghan are just perfect embodiment of what selfishness is.
Yeah.
The fact that they can look at every situation and they're really living off other people's dime right now. They're both pretty wealthy, and Prince Harry is extraordinarily wealthy if you consider the money he's receiving from his father still. And yet the way they complain about things with no real idea of what the world is like. I mean, Prince William and Prince Harry were always put across as almost modern royals. That's one thing that Diana was so popular for, is the fact that she really empathized with people. And yet this multimillionaire is flying around the world on other people's private jets, staying in Tyler Perry's house for months on end without paying a penny of rent, complaining about how terrible his life is.
Yeah.
And then Meghan Markle is just using him to really, until her next marriage, of course. That's my big bet, is that her third marriage is going to be the big tell-all book about how horrible Prince Harry was. I mean, no one really cares, and I think the fact that they don't want to give anything back, it's all about them, is the central issue here. And really, it's just about money and fame. And people don't like that when they have things going on in their lives which are far, far worse.
But doesn't it represent this broader cultural problem? It seems to me that the job that everybody wants these days is to be an influencer. You know, it's not really to do anything. It's not even to say, I don't know, write a book or do a job in politics or to start a business or to whatever. It's not to do anything. It's just to be something. You know, they want to wear the tiara, but the minute that it's inconvenient, then they don't want to have to be accountable to anybody. But this is ironic because all the left ever prattles on about anymore is how we need accountability. Well, where is the accountability?
Well, they don't actually mean it. I mean, we should just assume this with the left. They don't actually want accountability. Whenever they talk about accountability, it's a way of undermining what conservatives are doing. But we see this time and time again with the left, is they don't really care about living up to their own rules. But I also think, to be fair to the left, they're quite honest about it. I think they almost embrace the hypocrisy. They accept that things like cancel culture are a one-way street and it's a weapon for them. I think it's time for conservatives to really decide and put forward a strategy of how we deal with that. Because I think it's all very well sitting there sort of making fun of Prince Harry. He's a very funny guy and there's a lot to be made fun of. But I think the broader issue where the left are just destroying institutions with someone like Prince Harry's help, I think is something we need to wake up to pretty quickly, because before long, they already control all the institutions, and before long there won't be any left that we can even get into. Yeah,
there's a great meme of a headstone, and it says, "Here lies conservatism," and then the epitaph is, "Imagine if the situation were reversed," you know? And so we can chuckle about it and say, wow, this is so hypocritical. But I agree, I think you're totally right. We need a strategy to counteract it. Ian, where can people find you?
So they can just find me online. I'm write for the Daily Wire all the time, so head over to the Daily Wire, you can find my work there. All social media, IG, HAWORTH, follow me there.